Maryland still has a chance to win. There's one more competition going to happen in June, so we. Well,
Well,
they can still win too. I mean,
they got a better chance.
Yeah, they do.
The gentleman to my left.
Yes, hi, my name is Joseph Matthews, and I had two questions. The first is to any one of you all. I was a really good student in like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, but because my mother was very limited in funds, we moved around a lot, and I grew up in Oklahoma City, and we moved around a lot in different projects. Went to third grade, and now I was a really good student, went to third grade, and a month into my third grade year, I was placed into special education. And I grew up in special education and became very angry and fought a lot. Then dropped out of school. 4 months after dropping out of school, went to jail. And it wasn't until I got out of jail when I was 17 years old that I was given a mentor. And that mentor began to connect how relevant the work that I was doing was to the world that I was living in. No teacher could do that for me, but the mentor could. And so one of my questions is, I see that there's a strong need for mentors in our schools, because a lot of times kids are not dropping out because of, like, all of this great research is great. But if it's not connecting to the young people, if they don't buy in, it's a waste of time. And I think that there's a lack of an emphasis on getting mentors, because many of our young people, they're having outside forces that are interfering with the learning. And a lot of that is like life skills and all of these different issues that they're dealing with. And so one of the questions is there a, can any one of you all talk to me about mentoring and where the research is and where the dollars are for that? But it also, I want to go back to the third grade experience, because I'm really kind of disheartened by, there seems to be a lack of or a spirit of elitism when it comes to educators and parents. And I've just learned that, me being a new parent. I'm a parent of a 5 and 3-year-old, and I got probably the greatest compliment a few weeks back when I was called into the principal's office and charged as being an intrusive parent, because I'm always at the school with my children to make sure that it doesn't happen to them. And I was asked to stay away. This is in DC. I was asked to stay away because I'm interfering with the instruction. And so there seems to be a disconnect on so many levels, and I wanted to be a mentor to my kindergarten daughter and her classmates, and I was kind of pushed away. So I just wonder if one of you all could speak to that.
Sure, I'll begin with the mentoring and work back to the parent reception. So yes, I think a key point you're making is that when we look at giving all students what they need to succeed, we quickly come to the thing that a large number of students often need some sort of social and emotional support beyond a good lesson every day. And that gets back to your mentor connecting to the reason you're doing this, because it connects to something, to a better future. And that's often too much to ask teachers to do alone, because it's really hard to teach a good lesson every day. And then we say you also got to connect to a whole bunch of kids in a whole different many levels. We have to think about how we can bring this sort of second team of adults into the school to help with that, which can begin with parents, but needs to go beyond them to things like national service volunteers. They recently passed the Serve America Act, which creates a federal funding stream to bring in people who spend a year of service helping out with social needs. And that's a way to recruit. Another potential group is that college work study students can now get work study for community service. That's another great way to think of a second shift of adults. So we have to think about creatively how to get more adults in schools to help out with both the social emotional support and to enable a good lesson every day. And so that gets back to creating a welcoming atmosphere in a way for parents and teachers to connect in the school building that's not sort of this standoffish thing of, this is my business, that's your business, let's keep them separate.
Can I just comment on that real quickly? Sure. I'm a current student here, and I'm a school counseling student, and that is something that we should be able to do. And unfortunately, everything in research is on data, and we're getting forgotten. And this is very important. And I mean, if I asked you how is our role in the school, would you even be able to comment on that? I mean, I never hear, I mean, the obvious answer would be the school counselor would help, things like that. It's disheartening for me that you don't really hear about the school counselor anymore, and it's very important that we are involved.
They have a different role.
But you know, actually, and I'm just going to jump in very briefly because this is in my area of expertise, and it shouldn't be solely the school counselor. I think we really have to go back to professional development and how we educate principals and educators, because reaching out to families, reaching out to communities, creating a safety net for children where all adults have a role to play is not just the responsibility of the counselor. The counselor's role is absolutely essential, but it's also the role of the principal as well as all of those teachers. And so that gets back to how we go about training our educators, because families are absolutely essential. I'd like to talk to you afterwards because, you know, we should talk. But I guess the panel also may want to respond to your question, and then we have 5 other people I definitely want to get to before we close. So if anybody else wants to briefly address it.
I think one of the missing links is the connections between all of these adults who support young people. And we actually funded a grant with the University of Chicago to develop a tool around a lot of these key issues of how do you provide transparent information to parents and to students about this process of being educated. What are the standards? What are the actual benchmarks towards college readiness? And they developed a social network so that not only could the parent see where the student is along that trajectory, but they can also connect to the mentors and to the other adults supporting the students. And I think oftentimes, whether it's using technology or not, there's a communication gap between the actual educators, the parents, and those other adults outside of the school day. So where you can connect the infrastructure and that communication tie to actually support the students, I think is important, because you can mentor to the after-school program comments of you can mentor someone but not know exactly what you need to mentor them around. So how do you create that feedback loop so you can have targeted conversations about that young person's development?
Okay. We're going to go to the right very quickly. Yes. Yeah.
My name is Ed Hsu. I'm a teacher at Montgomery County. I teach high school math. This is my 9th year teaching. I've noticed, most of my students are middle or lower level students, and most of them are minority students. After a few years, I've realized that most of them are not connected to the school at all. They come to school, they leave. They don't belong to a club. They don't join any groups. So maybe I think one thing we could work on as educators, as principals, is try to connect to the minority students. Because being minority means, you're a little bit afraid, right? You come to a new school, you stand outside in the back. If nobody welcomes you, then after a while you say, I know what it is. But on the other hand, if people come and say, oh, come, let's do all this, have some after-school activities and involve all these kids, then once they connect to people, they will behave, they will learn, they will try to do a good job. That's my own feeling. And maybe, I think, the principal, you're still here. One of my feelings is, I come from a different country. I look at our Maryland education. Now, we go to school, the public schools, about 180 days a year, okay? Then about 60 of those days are used for testing, preparing for testing, or whatever related to testing. So that's, okay? So there's 120 days left, right? Then about half of those are used to review what was taught before, okay? So then there's 60 days left, okay? Where I go back to my country every summer, they have summer schools, okay? So my recommendation to you is maybe, I know everybody loves testing, but from teachers' point of view, if you could allow teachers to actually teach something, instead of having like all these testing, so we have to like, instead of teaching something interesting, we have to focus on getting the scores. Otherwise, something might happen. Okay. But then let me go back to Montgomery County, because I'm one of the teachers unions board members. So I try to work with the county on certain things that we feel are important. Now this is my own interest, okay? It has nothing to do with the union. So, but I know we're working on is, in Montgomery County, at grade 2, all students are tested to be GT or not, okay? And usually the data is, I think, 60% of white and Asian students are GT. Maybe 20% minority students are GT, okay? But the national average is 3 or 4%. So that means when you're second grade, okay, you're smart. Okay, we're gonna teach you good stuff. You know you're smart, but you are not so smart. So we're gonna give you regular stuff. Because I look at my students, mostly black hair, okay, minority students. They're smart, but they have not been, in the environment where, the GT people are supposed to be. So they're not, they're smart, but they're not there. So after a while, they just think, well, I don't know if I'm smart. They don't want to go to college. They don't want to study. So that's one thing we're trying to look at it is perhaps we can look at that situation and see if we can do a little bit better. So, and actually that's what I'm going to spend time on next year.
Great.
So, thank you.
Great comment. To my left, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Richard Perkins. I'm from Baltimore City Public Schools, and I've been there for 17 years now. I want to ask this question because no one else brought it up, so I have to get it off my mind. Mr. Smarlick, something you said about the overhauling of schools over the last 100 years or so just rubbed me the wrong way. Are you talking about throughout all the things about the last 100 years or so, or just certain things in particular? Because the last few minutes of discussion is centered around community. So my question to you and possibly Mr. Belfance also regarding what is the connection, or is there research that links, I guess, student success with schools in their community? Because I'm thinking that schools, from my memory in growing up, that the school was somewhat a hub of the community. There wasn't just for the academic purposes. There were other things happening in schools. And as a gentleman and other people have spoken of, schools can be used for more than just the academic rigor, the academic purpose. And in Baltimore, for example, you have students who are traveling all over the place. And as the gentleman just said, 3 o'clock, they leave. That's it. No more academic connection. And it's dark in the wintertime, so they get home. They can't stay and do other things. Mentors can't come into the building except during school hours. So there are a lot of things happening that retard the academic process during the school hours. But the schools are just buildings there being used only during school hours. So my question is centered around whether or not schools should be a part of the community which they're located in. I know we have some economic issues, but still, I think that's an issue that I feel should be addressed or somehow brought into the picture. So I'd like to have some response to that, please.
Sure. To answer your first point, my reference to 100 years of school reform was really based on this system question of how do you deliver public education, the school district as the mechanism for doing that. And there have been more iterations of reforms within that system than you can count, going back to the 50s and Sputnik and the progressive era and John Dewey and on and on and on. My point is we have embedded all of those reforms within a system that presumes that there has to be a school district, there has to be a school board, there has to be a superintendent, there has to be a big bureaucracy that owns all of the public schools in a geographic area. So that's point one. Point two about sort of, and it kind of relates to the earlier question about the culture of a school, what it means to a community, what it means to the kids themselves. The good news is that every high-performing, high-poverty school that I've read about, been in, does this exceptionally well. They have longer school days, they have longer school years, they have important wraparound services, they get parents involved to the extent that they can. The problem is you can have those additional things and have a low-quality school. So it's not adding those wraparound things that makes a school good. Those good schools do those additional things. So the problem is we used to think that, oh, if you provide dental services or if you provide after school, it will make a low-performing school better. actually doesn't work out in practice. The hub of a great school is a great school itself, and then they do things outside of that. So, I mean, there's this great example up in Harlem, the Harlem Children's Zone, where they have built all these great wraparound services around the schools. But the lesson of that was the schools were really low performing for the first handful of years. They had to get the school piece right. These wraparound services weren't making the schools better. Got to get school right first, and then add those additional things. So, I mean, the way that I kind of think about this is those additional things are sufficient. They're necessary, but not sufficient. So it helps if they're part of it, but just adding them isn't going to solve the problem.
Ms. Belfast, just regarding dropout rates and the same type of concept.
Yeah, so I think this is, getting back to, we've been talking about several tensions and that things that, get you 2 steps forward, get you a half step back. So I really think there is a lot to this idea of creating alternatives and choice, and not just saying that you can only go to this school, good, bad, or indifferent, you have to go to this school. That doesn't seem to work. But the flip side of saying is that we are going to have no community presence for a school, I think also doesn't work. I mean, I think ultimately you need to have in a community the choice to go somewhere else because it fits your interest, but the ability to also have a very strong community school. And there's like a growing community schools movement that has the 7 to 7 idea. Buildings should be open at 7 in the morning and not closed till 7 at night. And have a whole host of services so both parents can go and learn and students can stay after school. There's a place to get dinner if you need it and breakfast if you need it. And it becomes a whole hub of the community. Because you're right, in many economically sort of devastated communities, the only public institution left is the school building. And if we don't use that to its full advantage, we're not building up the community. At the same time we have to give people choice, we also have to find ways to build up the community.
Add one little point, and I think Bob's point about schools being the anchor for low-income communities is absolutely correct, and it was very painful for me and Jim Campbell to have to vote on closing schools in Baltimore City. And the only reason we did that is because the state threatened to and would have withheld school construction funds unless we did it, which is not to say we should have underutilized capacity, but we should have found a way to keep those schools. And choice is not inconsistent with community schools. If a failing school in a neighborhood is not working, then one of the choices is to have somebody else brought in to operate the school in that particular location and not deprive that community.
Great. Yes, thank you for waiting.
Hi, my name is Liz Masiello. I'm a first-year special education teacher in Montgomery County. In your introduction, Mr. Hedelman, you said that if you put 6 kids with IEPs into a classroom, you're setting this teacher up for failure. But there's a big push for greater general ed inclusion with collaboration between special educators, service providers, and general educators. So I'm wondering how everyone envisions special education as part of closing the achievement gap, especially when you factor in overrepresentation of Black and Hispanic students in special education.
I wish I had an hour, and maybe if you invite me back, my next book will be called The Shame and Sham of Special Education. And I actually wrote a report a few years ago called The Road to Nowhere, the Illusion and Broken Promises of Special Education. And it is a backwater, and you're my hero for taking it on. Good for you. There are 2 parts to the problem. The first thing is that most kids in special education wouldn't be there if general education were done right and if response to intervention began the way it's intended. Literally, at least 50 to 60% of the kids wouldn't be there. Then the second part of the problem is, well, there are kids there, and I'm working on this day by day. I represent kids as a pro bono advocate. And the expectations are so low. And the way IEPs, individual plans for students with disabilities, are written is the general understanding is if the student is making, quote, some progress, then that's good enough. But some progress has been interpreted to mean any progress, 2, 3, 4 months a year. Well, that's not right. These children, most of these children have the cognitive potential to achieve grade level standards. And to just put one and plug in again for Andres Alonso, I am working with him on a directive called 1 Year Plus, which I think will be revolutionary for the country. What Dr. Alonso has said is that students are entitled to goals and services that will enable them to achieve 12 months progress plus a reasonable reduction between their current level of performance, their plop, their current level of performance, and their grade level, so that a child in the 6th and 7th grade reading at second grade level should achieve 15 to 18 months to 2 years of progress. But when I go into IEP meetings now, it's like I'm talking a foreign language, but I think Dr. Alonso gets it, and I think it may very well happen, and I encourage you to raise a lot of hell in Montgomery County.
This is an issue that's personal. I have a son who's on the autism spectrum, and so he's been a recipient of both Baltimore City Public Schools as well as Montgomery County Public Schools. And he is high functioning. He has the ability to read and spell. He spelled Madagascar at the age 3. And so he's labeled special ed. He has an IEP. And as a parent, I know I have to advocate for his ability to be in accelerated classes and to have the challenging material that most students would have despite his label. And so I think it is a major issue with differentiation, that oftentimes school systems are not equipped to deal with students who may be different from the masses, and particularly students who may learn differently. And so again, I think that having him in an environment which he has been in since he was 2, of typically developing students, has benefited from him. If you saw him today, and I was thinking about bringing him, but he would probably have said, "Oh, there's my mommy," about 5 times during the panel, is that you would not know that he's on the autism spectrum. And so I think being able to provide these opportunities for students who have different learning needs, who have different ways of learning, to be in typically developing with their typically developing peers with those supports, whether it's pull out or in small groups, is important.
Just one additional thing, like policy-wise, one big movement that's already happened, because the race at the top and is going to keep happening even irrespective of that program, is that we're going to, more and more states are going to embed in teacher evaluations the growth, the educational academic growth of their students. So, for example, Delaware and Tennessee, both of them said that they will make student learning tied to individual teachers at least 50% of the teacher's evaluation. So a big question then becomes for special education teachers. So do we exempt special education teachers from that, saying, oh, there's no way that they can make real growth compared to non-special education students, and lower the bar? Or do we set some of them up for failure because they're severely cognitively disabled students and you can't make this difference? So the policy piece here is actually really important. And I mean, it seems like there's some special education educators in here. You need to be involved in this at the state level, because these discussions are happening right now, and they're going to continue to happen over the next couple months. But then, in the future, because the state board of education is going to make some decisions about this, how much student growth can be expected in the special education field? Huge question, and it's coming.
And there is also a move to be resisted, which is to reduce the requirements for special education students to be held to the same standards, and that hopefully is devoutly to be resisted.
Hello, my name is Trisha Douglas. I'm a student here at Johns Hopkins. I'm working on my master's in teaching, and I actually wanted to address a comment that you made earlier, Mr. Heddleman, in terms of African American or minority students asking if the concept of acting white is still rampant. And pretty much that goes to show that we feel a lot of times that the achievement gap can be attributed to the fact that African American and minority students feel that academic achievement somehow is a white trait. And I want to point out a little bit that research shows that oftentimes that culture or that belief is perpetuated within the schools through tracking systems, and also through low expectations, and also by not acknowledging and respecting the home culture of a lot of students. And students also share that the teachers and administrators oftentimes do not relate to them, and thus they don't have that type of buy-in in terms of academic achievement. So I wanted to ask you all if you feel that cultural relevance could play a role in terms of school reform, and also in terms of pretty much eliminating the achievement gap and what role cultural relevance should play in teacher preparation.
Again, I want to make sure that and we're all responsive. Could you define cultural relevance?
Well, pretty much training teachers to be able to relate to students on a term of, I don't really know how to encompass it fully. Cultural competency, yes, cultural pedagogy within teaching. So understanding the home culture of students, preparing them with the cultural capital of the dominant society, things of that nature, having teachers understand the home culture of students and preparing them for the dominant society, pretty much, if that makes sense.
Well, I assume you're familiar with the controversy over the work of Ruby Payne. Yes. And so, needless to say, this is another minefield, and I don't purport to have, the road through it. And then there's Delpit, Lisa Delpit's work, and I think, she tries to look at both. You have to sensitivity to culture, while at the same time make sure that you don't dumb down your standards for, or expect differently of minority kids. And you need, high standards for all. But you're right, I mean, it's a very difficult, sensitive issue. I wish I had a better answer.
Hi, my name is Kendall Battle, and I'm here as a parent. And I came to try to hear ideas from the educators on what we as parents can do to try to help the kids. I sit on a PTO. My daughter goes to a school called the Seed School of Maryland. We've done the public school here in Montgomery County. We've done the private school, and piggybacking off of the lady that sit down there, when my daughter went to an independent school, majority Caucasian kids, she felt less than, so therefore she didn't perform at the level that she could. Now she's over at a school where they believe that the school is for kids that are at risk educationally. So she's at a school where they believe that everyone there has the ability to learn. My daughter has jumped 2 grades level being in the school system that she's in, where teachers believe in her. But however, as a parent, and to bring information back to the parents on the board, what can we do to try to help the educators to do their job? Because if you cut us off, they're coming home to us. But I haven't heard you speak on parents.
Well, I think parents play a critical role, and I don't think, and I mean, Baltimore is actually figuring this out, Michael Sarbanes, of what does the system do to support parents in a much better way? Because oftentimes it is come pick your child up and drop them off type of relationship versus really a partnership relationship. And I think that's a lot to do with who the school leader is. But it is also the message that the district provides from above. So I think as a parent, someone who's actively involved in my child's education, that you not only have to look out for your own child, but the other children as well. And that's something that I've tried to do in various ways. And having a son with autism, I've sat on parent committees to talk about the importance of educating child care providers about autism, because this is something that you can diagnose early, and with early intervention could have significant impact on that child's life. So whatever role that you can play as a parent to educate others, and particularly of how you can support parents in this process, because oftentimes parents are intimidated to ask certain questions about the educational process, I think that will make a difference. I mean, as a parent, you have to advocate for other parents.
Well, that's why I'm here, to advocate for the other parents. However, as you say, they're intimidated by the system. But where do I go to get the information to try to bring back to them so that they're not intimidated? I'm sitting up here, I'm nervous, but I got to do what I got to do to help everybody.
Are you in communication at all with the school's principal?
Yes, I am.
I think that, it starts with that principal, and that principal really constructing a team, whether it's a group of parents, a group of teachers who sit down at the table and really map out and think in a very sort of conscientious and planful way, who are the families of the students, and then how can we help them to support their children in a variety of ways. And so afterwards, we're going to get together and we're going to sit down and sort of talk about some resources that may be available to you that you can take back to your principal and maybe get that conversation started. Because it's really hard to, I mean, this is a multifaceted topic, the whole notion of an achievement gap. And it's really hard to get all of the answers and get concrete suggestions in this limited amount of time. So I understand your frustration, but I think that we've started a dialogue and people here can connect afterwards and we can begin to sort of extend the dialogue. And remember, soetalk.com, getting online and blogging about this. And so maybe we can get some answers that way, some much more concrete ones.
Well, the other thing I also wanted to say, I can't pronounce or see the two names down there. I can't see that far.
Well,
but the ideas that the two of you talk about, I can say they work because they work at my daughter's school. I mean, they have University of Maryland or Georgetown or Johns Hopkins are the dorms that they stay in. Yep. However, me as a parent, I had to give up my child for her to be able to receive these resources. That's the sad part about it.
Yeah, so the seed school that you're talking about, in case people don't know, it's only the second residential. In D.C. there was a charter school, but this is a non-charter school, but it's a residential public school. I mean, I don't want to belabor this point, but every single high-performing urban school around has certain characteristics in common. They are no excuses school. They are absolutely positively dedicated to making sure every single kid in that building, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, is destined for college. They make no excuses about anything. They have the highest of expectations. And this is why the question of cultural competence, there's this tension here. If, in a sense, you want to be colorblind in a school and say, I don't care what you look like, you're going to college. I don't care if you're 2 years behind, you're going to college. How can you do that? And I think you can do it, but at the same time realize that kids come from different families and they have different needs, and the schools that are able to do that, God bless them. I mean, they can do amazing things. But I mean, parents who go to school boards and superintendents and say, damn it, enough, give me better schools, give me choice of schools, enable me to pick the best school for my kid, provide us no excuses schools, enough of these broken schools, do more for us. Oftentimes, school boards need to hear this. Superintendents need to hear this. The more demand there is from parents for the types of schools like this, like the seed school, like Kipujima Village, and on and on and on. I mean, demand leads to supply. I mean, they need to hear from you.
Okay, we're going to try to get in these last two questions before we close for the evening.
All right, I'll try to be brief. My name is Rochelle Hijazi, and I am an alternative educator in Montgomery County Schools. I think we're kind of forgotten about sometimes, unfortunately. And my quick question is, there's several of us who are trying to discuss change, and often we're not really heard, unfortunately. So maybe if you have suggestions of individual schools or school districts who have to have these alternative programs, which apparently we do, that are success stories that, you know, we can maybe then have a concrete like model to go off of and say, hey, this worked for them, because it unfortunately has not been working for probably, I'd say 90% of our students for the past 3 years that I've worked with alternative ed. Yeah, so if you have suggestions of places that alternative ed has, you know, been, you know, turned into something alternative and has been successful, that would be helpful for us, because we really seem to be tied down and not listened to, even though those of us who are really into it, you know, you get it.
Well, again, I don't think it's too soon for the results, but Dr. Alonso in Baltimore has made a very concerted effort to expand alternative schools, both creating, incidentally, he did something terrific. He created an alternative school in North Avenue headquarters, which to me sends an amazing statement out there, that there are no throwaway children, which is a line that he frequently uses. And he's also brought in some outside operators. Are we talking about alternative schools for overage children and children who are disruptive? Is that what you mean by alternative schools?
Ones who've been kicked out of school.
Yes. and overage children. He set up a whole bunch of schools, including with some outside contractors, for overage students, 2 years behind or returning kids and so forth. And again, I can't vouch for their effectiveness, but I do think that you'll see some models over there if you want to inquire about it. And
questions like this just get my dander up because I can just imagine how hard you've been working to do something right. I mean, I think that answer is right, but the political side of this has to be said. I mean, on my desk, I have this quote from Frederick Douglass: "Power concedes nothing without a demand." Power concedes nothing without a demand. You need to rabble-rouse sometimes. You need to push these school boards. You need to push these superintendents to do the things that are uncomfortable. Often there is a sense that groups like yours are just fringe elements and they can be ignored. And I've never seen major change happen to big bureaucratic systems without somebody demanding it happen. You seldom can negotiate big systems into doing things differently. Politically, good things always happen from pushing harder than pushing softer. Sometimes you can't negotiate great things from a position of weakness. Sometimes you just gotta demand.
And just two quick places to look, because this is a growing field of people trying to reinvent alternative education, and they're calling it like back on track schools to sort of give it a different idea. Look to Philadelphia, something called Project U-Turn. You'll find a website, and also an organization called Jobs for the Future, which is working sort of nationally to sort of create a network of these back on track schools. And I'll just give you some models which you can rabble-rouse around to show places where they've actually had success.
Last but not least.
Thank you. The parent motivated me to come back up again, so I just want to respond to her that parents and teachers are natural allies, and what you said, Dr. Sanders, just validated that point. The comment I wanted to make rather was that in terms of politics and pushing and forcing school boards to do what they have to do, I think too many parents and many educators are not politically active enough because, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hedelman, you may know this. Recently in Annapolis, during the General Assembly's session, there was a bill that was put forth to raise the age of consent from 16 to 18, where students are, by choice, can drop out of school.
I think there was an attempt. Jim Campbell would
There
probably
was an attempt, exactly.
to raise the age to 18.
And it was voted down. So we're trusting 16-year-olds to decide whether or not they should pursue higher education or not. We're allowing 16-year-olds to decide they can drop out of school. There's nothing you can do about it by law. Even parents can't change it. I've talked to enough parents to say he's 17, there's nothing I can do. So Mr. Belfance or another panelist, is there any comments you can make regarding what teachers, parents could do in regard to that? Or what has been done, rather?
You're right. They're the natural allies, and there's sort of a natural tension sometimes. But when they don't work together, things like this happen, right? It's sort of an incredible thing to say that the state says you can drop out at 16. You can't even say that they're chronically absent or truant anymore because they're past the legal dropout age. And yet, we know there's no future for a 16-year-old dropout, but it's still sort of legally sanctioned by the state. And it takes political pressure and demand to turn that around because they're actually worried about crazy things like if all these kids came to school, we'd have to build more schools, and that would cost us too much money. And honestly, that's why it gets voted down. And even that logic's not correct because what would happen is many kids are repeating grades multiple times, and if they were to stay on track and you kept the kids back, there wouldn't be that many more bodies in the school. But they don't even understand the own arithmetic of their own reason not to do it.
Unfortunately, most of us don't know who our state representatives are. We don't know who our state senators are. We wouldn't even know where the House Education Committee is or the Senate Education and Labor Committee is to go to one of these hearings. One of the most interesting things that's happened over the past year is in California, where there's this organization that's getting started that's called Parent Revolution. They're no longer just trusting teachers' unions to do things. They're creating parent unions so they can get educated, so they have an entree into the political system. And it's just, I mean, it seems a scandal to me that all these things happen to parents, happen to families, instead of families being involved in it or actually going and sort of taking part in this. I mean, if I had another 24 hours every day, I'd just spend it trying to unionize parents.
Okay, we have one last one. We started 5 minutes late, so we'll allow one additional question before we close for the evening. Yes.
I thought I just have to chip in on this discussion that you raised about the age of dropout. I'm Laura Berthume. I'm a member of the Montgomery County Board of Education, and we took a very strong stance asking our delegation to raise the age to 18, or at least to 17. And what we have is a little bit of a chicken or the egg problem, because we have been advocating with our state delegates about that. And part of the answer was, we don't have enough money right now with the budget crisis. But part of the answer was, what are you going to do different? What services are you going to provide these 17 and 18-year-olds who are disconnected from school to make them want to be there? Or are you just going to trap them in school for another 2 years? And so we have a chicken or the egg problem in convincing our delegates that it's going to be worthwhile for these kids. And I certainly wish that the bill had passed, and we will keep working on it.
Okay. Okay. Let's give our panel a big hand again. It is late in the evening, so I commend all of you who were able to stay to the very end. I think that even though this is a multifaceted topic, by concentrating on what schools can do, our panel has really given us a lot of food for thought, and we've gained a great deal. I want to end by just posing the question, and this is for you to pick up as you so choose on soetalk.com. We know what we've gained by really concentrating on schools in this particular session, but I wonder, did we lose anything by not talking about historical and current practices of discrimination, whether based on language, color, income, when we discuss this achievement gap? Because we know that definitely schools can do things, but we also know that schools exist in a larger social and economic context. And what do we gain by focusing on schools, and then what do we lose? So with that question, I bid you a safe journey home, and thank you so much for your attendance. Have a good evening.